Hello everyone, and welcome to the last of my Whispers of the Old Gods reviews. There was a lot of cards revealed on the stream late last week, so a lot to catch up on, and I'm just going to sort of go through all the cards I haven't talked about yet, and largely just give sort of short thoughts on all of them. So, here we go. First up is Anomalous. This is the Mage Legendary. Not really all that exciting to me. It's a big minion that has a death rattle ability that clears the board pretty much when it dies, but doesn't actually have any great defensive ability itself. If you're able to play a deck that's able to fight for board control and keep yourself alive, this could be a pretty powerful effect to clear the board late in the game, but you do have to get it killed when you want to clear the board, which is not necessarily that easy when it's a 6 health minion. So definitely an interesting and powerful card for some styles of decks, but not one that immediately jumps out to me as really a superstar. All right, Fandral Staghelm. This is a card that does stand out to me as looking really awesome. The new Druid Legendary works with all the Choose 1 cards. The most impressive interaction about this to me is that it works well with Druid of the Claw just on curve. You can play Fandral on turn 4, Druid of the Claw on turn 5, and just get a 4/6 charge taunt minion, which is really, really powerful. It also works very, very well with Druid of the Flame. If you play this and then the Druid of the Claw, then play 2 Druid of the Flames on turn 6, you get your 4/6 charge taunt and then a pair of 5/5s on turn 6. So this is a card that I definitely expect people to be playing a lot in Druid decks. Even if they are losing a lot of their powerful cards with the nerfs, this can potentially make up for a lot of that. And the Warrior Legendary is Malkorak. This is not really super impressive to me. A 7-cost 6/5 is okay. Equipping a random weapon is pretty valuable, kind of like a Blingtron that doesn't affect your opponent. But I think that you're going to generally want to have a more reliable impact of your 7-drop in a lot of cases. It's possible that you have things that interact with your weapon that you will want to use to go along with this guy. You can help supplement that, but that's really more of a rogue thing than a warrior thing. So I don't know that this guy's necessarily going to see a ton of play, but just because he is a body with significant immediate impact, the equipping the weapon, and value attached, that weapon, it's possible that he does find a home. All right, now we have Nat the Darkfisher. This is a kind of a weird card. So, clearly the corrupted version of Nat Pagal. Basically, just a overstated body with a drawback. Gives a chance for your opponent to draw extra cards. A 2/4 for 2, which is a pretty good stat line. I could see this being played in priest decks who really want overstated early minions. Against aggressive decks. If there's a really aggressive heavy format, this could be a card that could work pretty well in priest decks. The problem being, of course, that priest decks actually kind of want to keep their minions alive, and the longer that this card is actually alive, the worse it is for you. So maybe it's just sort of an anti-aggro card that sees play in any number of decks, maybe not necessarily priest, but it is certainly not a card that you just sort of throw into your deck because it is not really particularly good in a long game because you'll give your opponent potentially quite a bit of value. All right, next up is Princess Huhurin. This is sort of going along with the death rattle theme. We've seen a little bit of Hunter with things like Feign Death. This is interesting because it's actually a pretty powerful minion even without its ability. It's a 5-cost 6/5. Which is just a really strong stat line. It's also a beast, which is a pretty big deal for hunters because they obviously have powerful beast synergy cards like Kill Command and Houndmaster as well. Obviously, this pairs up especially well with Savannah Highmane, the original Hunter Legendary that's not really legendary. Doesn't really necessarily fit on curve with it, but as a hunter, you always can find use for 2 mana like your hero power, and playing Highmane into Huhurin and hero power you is also just quite strong. And as I mentioned, just the fact that it's a powerful body up front, 6/5 for 5, means that even if you're not getting value out of the battle cry of giving yourself the death rattle effect, you're still just getting a strong body that can put a lot of pressure on your opponent. So definitely a powerful card that we'll certainly see play. All right, Shifter Xeris. This is a hilarious card and a super cool card that really highlights the kind of things that are possible in Hearthstone compared to physical games. And I can imagine maybe someone might try putting this into a deck to just give them flexibility in terms of being able to play what they need when they need it. But it's random every turn. It's not like you can really control what you're going to need at any given turn as far as curve reasons and things like that. So mostly this looks like a card that will just kind of show up in cool highlight reel videos when it gives you exactly what you need, exactly when you need it. But overall, probably not a particularly powerful competitive card. All right, Twin Emperor Veclor. I remember these guys from Encourage, and they were a nightmarish raid fight. But I don't think there's any exploding bugs in this particular version, so that makes them a lot easier. No unbalancing strike either, so good to know. But these I think will potentially be a very powerful tool for Cthun decks to try and bridge to the later portion of the game, because getting not one but two taunts, a 4/6 taunt for 7 mana is obviously quite weak, but two 4/6 taunts is extremely powerful, because your opponent can't just silence one or bounce one or kill one and then just get through with damage. You're getting actually a ton of value and very resilient board presence out of this. It's kind of like the sort of Sludge Belcher effect. Sludge Belcher was able to absorb much more damage than it would if it was actually just a bigger statted minion. So this being two separate minions your opponent has to get through, and unlike Sludge Belcher, much more resilient to silence effects. So I think this is a card that will very likely find a home in any competitive Cthun deck. All right, Embrace the Shadow. This is kind of the one-turn Akanai Soul Priest effect. And this is a card that is certainly pretty exciting, because you can set up these big sort of burst to damage combos with it, and you can do it more easily than you can with Akanai Soul Priest. That's a very big deal of the difference between spending 2 mana and spending 4 mana to set up your burst combo turn. You could actually, with Emperor Thaurissan, much more easily do Embrace plus Prophet Velen plus bunch of heal spells than you could with Akanai. You can really only use the 1-cost heal spell with Akanai in that case. So I don't really see this as necessarily a super competitive card, because there is already Akanai, which is a more powerful card. It gives more actual game value than this, but it can certainly set up some cool combos, and I expect to see those in highlight reel videos soon. All right, Blade of Cthun. This is a pretty powerful rogue card for a Cthun deck. Obviously 9 mana, ton of mana to spend, but the effect to Battlecry and kill a minion with this additional body and the bonus effect for your Cthun is quite powerful. I would imagine that it would take a fairly slow metagame for this to really be a card that saw play in a lot of decks. But this effect of kill your thing no matter what it is. It's not like a big game hunter where you need to rely on having a particular characteristic of a minion or anything like that. So I think this is a powerful card if the metagame supports it, but we'd have to see a very control-oriented metagame before this card became a superstar. All right, so Crazed Worshipper. This is a Fen Creeper with a bit of upside. Even though it has the bonus of giving bonus stats to your Cthun when it takes damage, I just don't think it has stats good enough to compete with what else is going on at that stage of the game. So Fen Creeper, not really enough to get the job done. Cyclopean Horror, a 3/3 taunt Battlecry with +1 health for each enemy minion. This, maybe it could be a powerful tool against swarm decks. It's basically a Dread Corsair without the cost reduction in situations where your opponent has nothing. But if your opponent has at least 1 minion, it's a 3/4. If they have 2 minions, then it's a Ascension Shieldmaster. If they have more than that, you're getting a better deal. So if there is a metagame with a lot of swarm-based strategies, this could be a card that people lean on. Though I imagine in many cases people will be more inclined to play mass removal effects instead. So maybe this shows up, but I wouldn't bet on it. All right, next is Dark Speaker, which is a 3/6 with Battlecry swap stats with a friendly minion. This is an interesting effect because you can potentially get a minion that has some sort of ongoing effect that may have been damaged, the ability to buff that to 3/6, which is the Dark Speaker stats. It can also help keep alive things that may have gotten to combat already. It's kind of effectively going to heal something that's already in play to 6 health, while transferring that damage effectively to the Dark Speaker. So it's certainly an interesting card that has the possibility to help enable utility minions that otherwise might have difficulty remaining in play. Problem being, of course, that you have to have that minion in play and then spend 5 mana for Dark Speaker, so it does seem like it could be difficult to use. All right, Eternal Sentinel, a 3/2 for 2, already pretty good stats. With Battlecry, unlock your overloaded mana crystals. That's a very powerful effect, as we've seen with Lava Shock. The problem with Lava Shock for many decks was that you didn't really have that many opportunities to get value out of just the 2 damage effect. Obviously, in the very burn-heavy Shaman decks, 2 damage, great, I'll take it. But in more sort of control-oriented, mid-range style Shaman decks, you really couldn't take advantage of Lava Shock that effectively. But with Eternal Sentinel, you can potentially at least get the 3/2 minion for 2 mana here and get that unlock as well. So definitely having a variety of ways to sort of play with the overload mechanic is going to give a lot more options to Shaman decks that decide to go that path in the future. Forbidden Ancient, this is the Druid version of the Forbidden cards, and this is just a pretty cool card. A 1/1 that gets +1/+1 for each of your extra mana you have left over. So basically, it just has stats equal to your mana. So it's a 1/1 for 1, 2/2 for 2, 3/3 for 3, etc. That's going to give you a minion that is, interestingly enough, normally statted at some points in the curve, like 3 and 5 and 6 those are about the stats that you get for that amount of mana. But it's actually a lot worse at 1 and a lot worse at a lot of the high mana costs, because the sort of arithmetic for attack and health is kind of strange in Hearthstone. So it's interesting because it does provide you with a reasonable drop, maybe not a competitive drop, but a decent body at any point in the curve. The big problem is just how vulnerable the card is to silence, because if it is ever silenced, it becomes a 1/1, and if that's what you're doing with your turns later on, that can be truly devastating. So maybe this filler card for some decks, but I don't expect this to be a card that shows up regularly. All right, Shadowcaster. This is a really interesting card because a 5-cost 4/4 with Battlecry, basically copy a guy, make it a 1/1. This can give you ways to reuse Battlecry effects like Shadowcaster, for instance. You can just play repeatedly Shadowcasters to gain this effect. It also works very well with combo because it'll give you a card that costs 1 that you can use with another card later on to activate its combo ability. So this is a card that I think has a ton of potential and can potentially give a lot of interesting interactions to Rogue decks. So I would be keeping an eye on this one to see the potential it has in the future. Okay, Rallying Blade. It's a 3/2 weapon for 3 that gives all your minions with Divine Shield +1/+1. That's a very powerful effect because stats on Divine Shield minions are more valuable than most other places. The more power you give to a minion with Divine Shield, obviously the better sort of exchange it gets out of its Divine Shield. So we've lost Shielded Minibot, but there's still Argent Squire, and there's still the Steward of Darkshire that also gives your minions Divine Shield as well. So I could potentially see some sort of Divine Shield deck maybe coming together for Paladins because this card is quite strong in that kind of archetype. All right, Evolve. This is a Shaman card that transforms your minions into random minions that cost 1 more. It's a really interesting card because both you're getting some amount of value from it because you're upgrading your minions. Granted, you may be upgrading your minions into things that aren't actually better because you could turn something that has actual good stats into something that had a Battlecry effect that you don't get because you evolved into it rather than playing it. But it's worth noting that it's actually quite good with totems. You can actually turn your totems into actual minions, and then you can keep making totems. It also effectively heals all of your minions. If you've attacked your minions into your opponent's things and gotten a bunch of damage on them, you can evolve as well, and now your minions are both grown into something better, potentially better at least, and as well as having all their damage removed. So definitely a very interesting card, and I'm certainly going to be trying it out myself. Blood to Ichor. This is kind of like a mini slam. It does 1 damage for 1 mana rather than 2 for 2. And instead of drawing a card, it makes you a 2/2 slime. I think this is a card that is going to be worse in decks that are looking to damage opposing minions, because obviously Slam drawing you a card is almost always going to be useful, whereas making a 2/2 Slime is less valuable for a control deck, clearly. But for a deck that's looking to damage its own minions, perhaps using Blood Warriors or Grim Patron, things like that, this can potentially be fairly strong because you're able to actually develop a board presence in addition to triggering your self-damage cards. So could see play, but certainly not going to replace Slam in decks that usually play that. Journey Below. This is kind of interesting from a rogue perspective. We saw a lot of the Death Rattle cards rotate with Naxxramas, so just how powerful this card will be is unclear. One thing that's nice, though, is that it potentially serves as an early drop for a Unearthed Raptor deck. I've actually been playing quite a bit of Raptor Rogue prior to the standard format, and obviously the loss of Nerubian Egg and Haunted Creeper is pretty huge for that deck, because those are really the cards you generally plan to play on turn 2 in order to set up your Raptor on turn 3. With Journey Below, you can potentially find cards in the 2-drop slot like Undercity Huckster. Just gives you a little bit more consistency in the early plays that you can possibly have to set up that Raptor. So I'm definitely going to be trying this card out myself in new versions of Raptor Rogue. So it's definitely a card that I think is worth keeping an eye on. Addled Grisly. A kind of a weird card. It's a 3-cost 2/2, which is pretty weak, but it's a powerful effect with cards that actually make multiple minions. It's important to note this is when you summon a minion rather than when you play a minion. So this does affect cards like Dark Whispers or Wisps of the Old Gods, things like that. It also works very well with Violet Teacher. So I think this might be a card that if you're playing a token style of Druid deck, maybe with the new version of Force of Nature, just making 3/3s instead of 2/2s. The problem being, of course, that you're playing upfront a 3-cost 2/2 minion that you then have to protect while you try to get to the other spells that you're using to create those multiple minions. So it's kind of like a Power of the Wild that you have to play before, but that has a continuing effect if it's able to remain in play. So pretty high variance card, I think, high risk, high reward style of card. But when you actually get the payoff, it's definitely quite powerful. So Blackwater Pirate, your weapons cost 2 less on a 4-cost 2/5. That's a pretty powerful effect. You can play this and something like Fiery War Axe in the same turn. So it can have a pretty significant tempo impact on the game. It is a pretty weak body, but at least has 5 health, so it stands up health-wise to things at the same cost. Can potentially be used to clear smaller minions just as well as something like a Chillwind Yeti could, and then help ramp you into your big weapons. You can potentially even play like a Gore Howl on turn 5 with this card, and that can give you a lot of value over the course of the game. So it's really an interesting card that I think is worth exploring, because any cost reduction effect is typically very, very powerful in a collectible game like Hearthstone. So Bloodsail Cultist. This is a pretty well-statted minion to begin with, the 3-cost 3/4. It's kind of the highest stats we typically see without some additional requirements, and it has an effect, which if you have a pirate, which I assume is another pirate since this is a pirate as well, give your weapon +1/+1. So this is a pretty strong effect. Not only is it a great body, but it also is giving you the upgrade effect on your weapon. And that's actually something that can be good at pretty much any stage of the game. It doesn't necessarily have to be on curve on turn 3. But if you do play, say a turn 1 pirate, turn 2 War Axe, turn 3 this guy, it's actually extremely strong, giving you that 4-attack weapon with the additional durability. So I think that if there are pirate warrior decks, which I think there is very good reason to believe there might be, this is a card that will fit very well into them. So Corrupted Seer, it's a 2/3 for 6, so pretty bad stat line, but Battlecry, deal 2 damage to all non-Murloc minions. This is clearly a card that is intended to go in Murloc decks, duh. But an AoE of only 2 damage, 6 mana, that's not necessarily going to be super impactful in a lot of cases. That said, Murloc decks actually typically struggle to deal with other strategies that are also flooding the board, typically because Murlocs themselves are generally fairly understated compared to other minions that aren't Murlocs. So this can give you a way as a Murloc deck to kind of come back against a Zoo-style deck, a Paladin deck, anything like that that may be trying to build up a big board presence. That said, 6 cost 2/3, that is not really going to have a big board impact in a lot of cases if you're playing against an opponent with a lot of rather against an opponent with big minions rather than small minions, or against a control deck, probably not going to have a huge impact. So definitely an interesting card because it does provide board control tools to Murlocs, which is something they've definitely been lacking. All right, Cult Sorcerer, a 2 cost 3/2, spell damage +1. After you cast a spell, give your Cthun +1/+1. One thing that's interesting about this card is that it's actually totally fine even if you're not playing a Cthun deck. Just a 3/2 with spell damage +1 is something that mage decks may just want anyway. The best option other than that, if you want a body that gives spell damage, is either Bloodmage Thalnos or the Kobold Geomancer. And this is a more aggressively oriented version of either of those cards, obviously just strictly better than the Geomancer, that also has this upside if you happen to be playing a Cthun deck. And if you are playing a Cthun deck, if you are building up a lot of effects off of the Cult Sorcerer with whatever spells you are casting, you can obviously build up a stronger Cthun that much more quickly. So this is a card that I would expect to find a home both in potentially Cthun decks and non-Cthun decks that just want a good early drop with spell damage. All right, Darkshirt Librarian is a kind of interesting card. It's a 2 cost 3/2 with Battlecry, discard a card, Death Rattle, draw a card. So one of the interesting things about Warlock is they do have the discard effect as a cost on many of their cards. And we do have cards like the Tiny Net of Evil or Fist of Jaraxxus that can benefit from discarding. So this kind of cycles you through your deck to help you find other cards that you may not have in your hand right now. Give you a little bit more deck velocity, which is something Warlock is typically quite good at, just given the fact that it has life tap. Also worth noting that if you play this with an empty hand, you have no effective cost to it, and you will still draw a card when it dies. So it's a 2-drop that actually pretty much becomes a free card later in the game because it replaces itself if you have no hand. So this is a pretty powerful card, I think, that may end up seeing a reasonable amount of play. So Demented Frostcaller, the stat line for this does not look good. It's a 2/4 for 4 mana, but the ability is extremely powerful. After you cast a spell, freeze a random enemy. This can allow you to totally lock out weapon-based decks by just chaining spells. If you just Arcane Intellect each turn, your opponent can never use a weapon when you have Demented Frostcaller in play, unless they play multiple minions and you can't play enough spells to freeze all of them. It's important to note that this apparently will not double trigger on the same enemy. So if your opponent has a frozen hero and you cast a spell, is guaranteed to freeze a minion. So this is a very, very powerful card against weapon-based decks and decks that will typically have a small number of minions in play. And I think that this is a card that will certainly allow decks that are heavily spell-based to really neutralize those big threats very easily. All right, Disciple of Cthun. This is a pretty powerful card just stat-wise. Battlecry, deal 2 damage on a 3 cost 2/1 is a totally reasonable ability, just sort of naturally. You can kill an opposing minion and have a body to stick at. All right. So a 3 cost 2/1 that deals 2 damage with a Battlecry when you play it, that's just kind of a powerful effect to begin with. It's obviously 1 more damage than Ironforge Rifleman, but 1 less health. And it has the Cthun buff on it as well. Ironforge Rifleman may not be a superstar, but doing 2 damage rather than 1 damage is a pretty big upgrade. Obviously, 1 health is a much more vulnerable position because it dies to hero powers and any minion. But I think that this is a card that it might be a reasonable choice for Cthun decks in particular, and perhaps even decks that are just looking for a little bit of extra removal. Doomcaller. This is a kind of a weird card. It's a 8 cost 7/9, give your Cthun +2/+2. If it's dead, shuffle it into your deck. It's interesting because if there is a game in which you need to play Cthun multiple times, this gives you that option. But how often is your Cthulhu deck going to play Cthulhu and then have it die and then you lose? Probably not that often is my thought. I probably would rather have cards that help me win the game early and get to the point where I can play my Cthulhu, or power up my Cthulhu early on and ensure that it is big enough so that I will win when I play my Cthulhu. A card that is only good after you've already played your Cthulhu and not won doesn't really seem like something that is terribly attractive to me. It's possible that there are matchups where that will happen, but generally I think that you're better off trying to tweak your deck so that you have alternate roads to victory rather than necessarily just heavily relying on something like Cthulhu to the point that you need to play it twice. All right, Forlorn Stalker. This is kind of an interesting card because it is certainly pushing the Death Rattle theme a little bit more for hunters, giving all Death Rattle minions in your hand +1/+1. It's only a 4/2 for 3 though, and that's a pretty terrible stat line. 3-cost minions that die to 1-cost 2/1s are not really where I want to be, almost no matter what deck I'm playing. Typically you don't see many minions that trade with, well, previously Leper Gnome, now Abusive Sergeant, find that much play when they are higher cost. So it doesn't really have a powerful enough effect, I think, with its battle cry in order to justify how weak it is as far as its stat line naturally. So Infested Wolf, a 4-cost 3/3 with Death Rattle, summon 2/1/1 spiders. Obviously, a little bit more of this Death Rattle theme in Hunter. It certainly pairs very well with Forlorn Stalker if you're kind of doing that thing, but overall, I think that this is an interesting card because I assume, I'm not sure right now, but I assume these spiders are actually beasts themselves, which means that they pair well with Houndmaster, with Kill Command, things like that. And Hunter has a lot of ways to synergize not only with the Death Rattle ability, like Princess Uhurin that we saw before, but also with just small minions. We have things like Hunter's Mark, things like, again, this Kill Command, Houndmaster that can enable you to gain value from having these small beasts in play. So this is a card that I think up front doesn't necessarily look super strong, but I think can give you sort of a sticky board presence that can be quite powerful. And I wouldn't be surprised to see this kind of be a sleeper card of the set. All right, Midnight Drake. This is a dragon, so thumbs up for me on that front already. Kind of like the opposite of Twilight Drake, pretty clearly. It gets +1 attack for each other card in your hand when you play it. This is kind of interesting because one of the problems with Twilight Drake was always that it was extremely vulnerable to silence effects because it would just die. Midnight Drake doesn't die to silence effects. It still will have 4 health, but unfortunately it will lose its attack bonus. I think that generally speaking, I'm going to be happier with Twilight Drake simply because health is more important than attack at this sort of stage of the game, I feel like, and especially for dragon decks. Dragon decks typically are looking to use their early minions to trade with opposing early minions, sort of fight this game of attrition to get to the end game where they can leverage their powerful minions. So if you're looking for more dragons, maybe this is one that slots into a deck, but I think that there's actually just a lot of good 4-drop dragons anyway, with Twilight Drake and Twilight Guardian already. So sadly, not a dragon I'm super excited about, but maybe you can find a home. All right, Selfless Hero. This is, I think, a pretty powerful card. It's a 2/1 for 1, already totally normal stat line. Death Rattle, give a random friendly minion Divine Shield. We've already seen some Divine Shield synergy stuff for Paladin already, and this is just a strong effect. Being able to give a minion Divine Shield with a minion that you've already played preemptively. This is kind of like an Argent Protector, but it's an Argent Protector that gets to actually have a reasonable stat line to begin with, because you can play it turn 1. Your opponent can't necessarily control exactly how it goes, nor can you, but you have more control than your opponent does because you can choose to attack this into something after playing a minion. So if you just imagine the sequence of turn 1 Selfless Hero, if your opponent plays a minion that your Selfless Hero could trade with, you play a 2-drop minion, then attack your Selfless Hero in, and now you just have a 2-drop with Divine Shield, which is quite strong. So it allows you to play on curve and gain this advantage from your Divine Shield. So I expect aggressive Paladin decks will certainly look to play this card. So Servant of Yogg-Saron. This is a card that kind of was controversial when it was first revealed. A lot of players not really happy about the random element because it can clearly be pretty game-defining if something powerful comes up. That said, the stat line and cost of this, I think, are not such that this will really be put into decks that are trying to really be hyper competitive. You're just mostly, I think, going to play this in a deck that's looking to do wacky, crazy, random things rather than into a tournament deck. Because obviously, you're generally going to get some degree of advantage from casting a 5 or less cost spell. On average, you're going to have some benefit from that. But there's so many fail cases because you could fireball your own things. You could just fireball this. You could assassinate your own minions, and it's just not a sort of card that people are typically going to be looking to play in Constructed. So I don't really see the threat of this being something that's adding random elements to competitive play. It's not like a Piloted Shredder. Piloted Shredder was a card that was so well statted that people felt compelled to play with it, and thus these random elements were consistently deciding the outcome of games. This is a card that you're not going to play unless you are actively trying to add more randomness to your game, and that's probably not going to be something that really sees play at the highest level.